Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. The topic today is Chinese economy today. We are going to be discussing some of the important points that have to do with the present reality in the Chinese economy. We are privileged here to have Professor Wang Zhangkai. This is the second time that he joins us in a webinar at CEBRI, but the last time he was in China, we were here. And this time, we are both here in Gavia, in Rio, at CEBRI. Professor Zhangkai is a professor of finance at Tsinghua University, editor of the Journal of Government and Economics, and a research fellow at the Academic Thinking for China's Practice and Thinking. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. It's my great pleasure.
Welcome. Let's start. Let's start discussing growth. China will end this year reaching the target of 5% growth. And this is possible first because consumption has been showing a very good performance in the more recent periods, more recent months, and also because of the services economy. And but still in the manufacturing sector, there is not the energy that one sees in consumption and sees in services. And fixed asset investments in China are still declining. And we may think about what's going to happen next year. Is consumption and services enough to sustain the economy? Will the reality in the manufacturing and industrial sector change? In a nutshell, what's your assessment of the performance of the economy today?
Okay, actually, I think the performance of the Chinese economy this year sort of falls short of people's expectations. I think the major reason for this below expectation performance is the fact that there has not been expected government stimulus plan as people expected at the end of last year. So basically, this year, the central government has been taking some very cautious and conservative fiscal and monetary policies, only until the end of October, when the central government announced an additional 1 trillion yuan of central government bond. Okay, so the 5% economic growth this year has been largely achieved without much stimulus from the government. So you can view that as kind of natural recovery of the private sector, and it's difficult. And given the time lag between the announcement of this fiscal stimulus and the actual effect, I would probably predict that early next year, the Chinese economy is going to see some significant signal of improvement.
Very, very good. Let's discuss a little bit more this stimulus, the so-called special treasury bonds.
Yeah.
This is, I understand, the fourth time that China issues or authorizes the issuance of special treasury bonds. The first one was in '98, the second in the crisis in 2007, the world crisis, the third one during the pandemic in 2020. And my understanding is that 500 billion are going to be issued this year, and then another 500 billion next year. And this is the reason why you just said that the start of the year is going to be a positive start of the year.
Exactly.
But I want to discuss a little bit the impact of this issuance on the fiscal accounts, because the fiscal deficit is going to increase, isn't
Yes.
it? From 3.3% to 3.5 or 3.8%.
3.8.
3.8.
With this new 1 billion added to the
3.8%. Could you discuss a little bit this aspect? What's the impact on the fiscal account, and whether this is a positive or a negative aspect in the economy?
Okay, so this 1 trillion special government bond many would view this as a beginning of things alike. So basically, China has a relatively healthy central government leverage, which is quite low, but most of the debt problems actually occur at the local government level. And because the law forbids local governments from directly issuing their own bonds, so they would do it in disguise. So they created this special entity called local government financing vehicles. So it's a special local state-owned enterprise which issued a bond. But the market understands that it is not simple. It's not just a straightforward corporate bond. So it's a local government bond in disguise. So if we count that as a part of government debt, then the local government debt in China is relatively high. So what people are talking about is the most sensible way to solve that problem is to move that part of local debt to the balance sheet of the central government, which has the ability to issue very long-term government bond like the US government. So this 1 trillion special central government bond is to be given to the various local governments without specific purposes, without specific methods of use. So the market's consensus is that the local governments would swap this 1 trillion bond with their own existing local government bond. So essentially, we would see that for this 1 trillion central government bond to put into service, we would see a swap of high yield, low credibility local government bond into low yield, high credibility central government bond. So it's not only good for fiscal purposes, which solves some of the more imminent problems of some local governments, but it will be very helpful for the stability of the credit market as well.
So there's a positive impact on transparency as well, isn't it?
Yes.
So hidden debt at the local level, or debt by the special purpose companies that were created, now it's going to be replaced by federal government's debt, and resources being transferred to the local government. So it will be easier to analyze the reality, the financial reality in the economy.
Yeah, it will be easier to analyze, and more importantly, the overall risk will be reduced.
Very good. Let's go to my third question, which has to do with this inflation deflation reality, which is very much discussed in the Chinese economy today. There's a downward pressure on prices in China. In November, producer prices decreased by 3%, and from January to November, 3.1%, and consumer prices decreased by 0.5%. So prices are clearly decreasing. And at the same time, consumption has been responsible for the recent figures on growth, but there's still an uncertainty about the future of consumption. How do you see this reality? Are those price decreases a temporary reality, or we are going to see deflation occupying the Chinese economy today, and then with all the impact that deflation usually has in economies?
Okay, in the short run, I think this deflationary trend is temporary, for the very simple fact that the Chinese New Year is coming. So it's a seasonal thing. So usually during the Chinese New Year, consumer prices will be up. So you can imagine that an equivalent phenomenon would be in most Western countries, prices would be up during Christmas. Okay, but the real but this does not hide this does not cover all the structural issues related to this decreasing prices. So it reflects the fact that the Chinese economy lacks significant and enough macroeconomic demand side forces. Now, for example, as I said before, the Chinese central government has been largely sitting idle this year without putting much fiscal resources into the economy. So we have lack of government demand on one side. And then the second, if we look at the global trade this year, actually we would probably be seeing a shrinking volume of global trade this year. So this means that for a large exporter like China, we would be experiencing a reduced external demand. So combining these two factors together, it puts lots of downward pressure on consumer prices. So it's very important that in the beginning of next year, the Chinese government need to do more in order to inject more demand into the economy so that the prices will be up again.
Very good. Let's discuss the real estate sector, because it's a sector that everyone follows with a lot of attention, because it's responsible for 35% of GDP growth.
About 30%, according to a paper released by Professor Rogoff of Harvard.
There are many different assessments of the real estate sector. Many different assessments have been made recently. First, with a very negative view about the future of the real estate sector. More recently, I think with a more positive view, having to do with basically two facts. First, the fact that the government has been acting very strongly. They identified a number of companies, if I'm not mistaken, 70 companies that have never defaulted and that would be able to benefit from new loans. They have encouraged the banks to lend more to real estate companies and lend more in terms of mortgages in a way so as to stimulate the sector. But still, the sector is still not as energetic as it was in the past. And housing prices are still falling in major cities, and the level of engagement of the companies is not as strong as it was in the past. What's your assessment of the real estate sector and its importance to economic growth in next year and in the next few years?
Okay, I think first of all, I don't think the urbanization story of China is over. So there is real continuing demand for better housing among citizens in China. But what we have been witnessing in the real estate sector in the past 2 years actually is part of a broad picture. So you may know that since 2017, the Chinese government has officially pivoted away from pursuing high economic growth to a more balanced and healthy model of economic growth. And part of that pivoting away from high speed of growth is to reduce the macroeconomic risks in the economy. And among these risks, the high leverage in the real estate sector was considered one of the major risks facing the economy, and therefore may one day jeopardize the health of the economy. So to implement this new growth philosophy, the government imposed some very harsh restrictions on external finance of the real estate sector in the summer of 2021. But obviously, they did not expect that their effort to stabilize and de-risk the economy would turn out to be destabilize the macroeconomy. So they had to reverse a lot of the previous policies. So I think this is one of the reasons that this reversal is kind of slow. So if we compare the way of implementing a policy implementation of the central bank in China with that of the Federal Reserve in the US, you see two different ways of carrying out policies. So on one hand, the Federal Reserve has been very resolute whether to reduce the interest to zero in order to fight against the shock of COVID, or to raise the interest to a very high level in order to fight against the threat of inflation. But on the other hand, if we look at the China's central bank, it's always slow. It's always slow. So I think part of the reason might be cultural, but part of the reason might be related to the fact that the central government is actually reversing some of its own previous policies. So it's a little bit awkward for them to acknowledge that they kind of overreact in the first place, and they made some kind of mistakes. So they had to reverse their previous measures. So this the whole real estate crisis has a spillover effect. So it started from those most highly leveraged developers, and it gradually spread away to other more healthy developers. So this is quite a worrisome phenomenon. But as you have just mentioned, our central bank and the other financial regulators have realized the importance of stabilizing the real estate market, and lots of new policies have been introduced this year. And I don't think people are very worried that the downfall of the real estate sector will have some real impact on the finance sector. Well, I don't think there's going to be a 2008 type of financial crisis related to China's real estate sector, simply because China has a very centralized financial system, and it's hard to have a classical type of bank run. But it's likely that it will impact the healthiness of the financial sector, and it will have some very long-run negative impact on the Chinese economy.
Let me think about the long run, thinking about the real estate sector. As you said, a correction is needed, structural reform is needed. And in a way, we can anticipate that the participation of the real estate sector in growth is going to be lower, isn't it? Which sectors, in your view, could replace the force and the importance of the real estate sector in the economy? Are these the sectors that have to do with the low carbon economy? Are there new sectors that are not still visible to those who follow the Chinese economy? How do you see the next step after this correction in the real estate sector?
Well, first of all, we have seen some very encouraging and unexpected stars in the Chinese economy, like China's electrical vehicle production sector, which has caused the Europeans to be very worried about the likely impact on the European car market and things alike. But I don't think these new technologies will be large enough to entirely replace the real estate sector. So in the end, we would hope that things will work out well, and gradually next year or the year after next, when the balance sheet of those real estate developers could be fixed, they will be back to normal business as usual. So that's very important. So we should have, on one hand, of course, we would be very interested in encouraging those new economy to emerge. But on the other hand, we would hope that the old economy would remain resilient as we wish to.
Very good. Let's talk about the participation of the private sector in the economy, because there are many doubts lingering around about what's the role of the private sector, what's the expectation about the private sector's role in the economy. What we have seen recently is the government announcing a number of measures to encourage the private sector. In July, I think 25 measures were announced. More recently, a number of measures were announced again, I think 31, isn't it? Then we saw the NDRC, the Reform Commission, approving a special department or a special unit just to deal with the private sector. It seems that the government is making every possible effort to tell the private sector, well, we count on you. You need to participate in the economy. But it seems that the private sector is not totally confident at this point to continue to invest when we look at the investment figures. What's your view? What's the role of the private sector? Will the government be able to change the perception of the private players about the economy and encourage investments, or at the end of the day, SOEs and the public sector is going to be the main driving force of the Chinese economy?
Well, I think there is common misunderstanding or urban legend among external observers on the Chinese economy is that, well, because you can see that there's a large state sector in China, and at the same time you see this rapid economic growth, so perhaps there's some kind of correlation or even causality between the two. But obviously, I think even some Chinese government officials would have this misunderstanding. But obviously, what happened in the past 5 years tells us that this increasing role of the state sector and the SOEs have not proved to raise the economic efficiency and boost economic growth. So in the end of the day, the government has already realized that it is the private sector that contributes most to China's economic growth and to China's stellar performance in EV and other high-tech sectors. So I think, as you just mentioned, this year the Chinese government have taken some very active attitude trying to boost the confidence of the private sector. Of course, I think it takes, when you break a girl's heart, it takes lots of time and effort for you to win back her love. So it takes time. But I think the more important lesson is that China does have this resilience, and China does have the ability to move back to the right trajectory. So I think the reason for this is simply because China is a large open market economy. So which means that even a powerful government like the Chinese government would face lots of constraints on its behavior. So I think the beauty of the market economy is that any government actions and policies would have immediate feedbacks. So this would put lots of constraints on the government's intention and some policies. And also China is an open economy, is deeply interconnected to the rest of the world. So which means that the government's policy would have immediate consequences outside China. So that's a second constraint on the government actions. So I think all these constraints brought forward by a large open market economy is very good to act as a corrective force, so that the market-oriented reforms will continue. So I think I do have confidence on the long-term perspective of the Chinese economy.
Well, there are also broken hearts among the international companies operating in China, isn't it? And I have also seen the government making a number of efforts to get closer to the multinational companies and saying, oh, come on, stay here. Even in an environment which is very difficult because of the US policies and because of the constraints to export and even to invest in China, isn't it? But I have seen the government making a lot of effort to get closer to the European companies, to establish a good dialogue, and other countries as well. How do you see that? How do you see the participation of foreign companies in the Chinese reality?
Well, of course, I think they are even more heartbroken than the domestic private sector. So they obviously they are not only just need sweet words. I mean, they need flowers and diamonds. So they want to see the real attraction provided by the Chinese government and by the Chinese market. So I think the Chinese government should realize that actually, ironically, this tension with the United States actually is putting Chinese government to be more actively open to other alternatives, like, as you mentioned, to the European companies and perhaps to companies in South America. So I think in equilibrium, these are very good for the Chinese economy in the long run. I think one of the complaints of the very legitimate complaints of foreign business, for example, is the very lengthy and inconvenient process of Chinese visa. So recently, Chinese government has moved some initial steps, try to correct for that problem. So I think China has announced that 6 European countries have been given visa-free status to come China. I do hope that list should be enlarged to include most other countries, not just in Europe, but also in the world.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that a number of European countries now are authorized to have their citizens going to China for a short period of time, but enough, to discuss business.
Yeah, but I think it's 30 days, so it will be enough for business trips and most tourism.
Well, my final question has to do with this topic of quality of growth, because we've seen China talking a lot about quality of manufacturing, quality of growth, and all that. We in Brazil, we discussed this issue of reindustrialization. So a new industrialization having to do with the path towards the low carbon economy, and then in China we see a lot this expression quality growth, quality manufacturing, quality. What's the meaning of that? How do you see that?
Okay, as I just mentioned before, I mean, in the past 5 years, the Chinese government has quietly pivoted away from the previous model of pursuing high economic growth, and the replacement of that is this new term called high quality growth. But to be frank, no one knows what this high quality growth is, because quality is is not something you could quantify. So unlike the speed of economic growth, so quality is something quite let's say subjective. So it's like a black box in which you could put anything but high economic growth into it, which includes environmental protection, green energy, high tech, and things like this. But my assessment is that for China's top-down system, you need a very clear policy target for other government officials to follow. And this high quality growth does not seem to be a clear target, which does not send out a clear enough signal to all players in the economy. And as the economy slows down, people would realize that high quality development, the precondition for high quality development is development. Without development, you don't have high quality. So I think Chinese is a nation which puts a lot of emphasis on the use of language. This actually gives us some kind of flexibility. So hopefully, when Chinese government realizes the importance of high economic growth, they could put high economic growth as part of that high quality growth. So I think this is what we may expect next year.
Well, we exhausted our time. Professor Wang, thank you very much for your participation and your very clever answers. And I think they are very helpful to all those who accompany to follow the Chinese economy today here in Brazil. There are many who follow the Chinese economy. Bankers, academics, companies that operate with China, either in trade or investments. And I think that we were able to clarify a number of questions during this short but very rich exchange of views and very rich webinar. Thank you all for your participation. Merry Christmas to everyone. Next year, we are going to be back here with our Chinese program, our Asian program, doing as we have been doing so far, very intensely, bringing in Chinese experts, Chinese entrepreneurs, Chinese voices to explain what's going on in the Chinese reality. Thank you very much and Happy New Year.
Thank you.